Hi, everybody. It's Miss Kelly again, and we're back for the third part of our little series on poetry here. And we've talked about the features of a poem. We've talked about different types of poems. And now we're going to talk about how to analyze a poem, which I think is the most interesting part of poetry. And we're going to be taking a closer look at some poems and seeing if we can be like detectives and figure out what the poems mean. So think about when you go outside and you look up at the sky and you see the clouds and maybe you see a shape in the clouds, right? Maybe you're looking at this cloud and maybe you see like a dragon, right, who's blowing fire out of his mouth. But maybe your friend sees a horse whose mane is flowing and who's running, right? There's no right or wrong answer. It's up to your interpretation, your point of view, your past life experiences that maybe sort of influence how you might see something. And poetry is a lot like that, where the poet, the writer, may have had one thing in their mind, and maybe the reader takes something else away from it. So as we look at some poems today, we're going to take a closer look, and we're going to see if we can figure out what they mean. And keep in mind that maybe there might be another meaning that we haven't thought of that maybe you think of, or maybe that you're feeling when you read the poem. So when we're analyzing poetry, in order to understand a poem, you have to read it several times to take a closer look at it. So you have to really be familiar with the text. You can't just read it once and say, okay, we're going to know exactly what this poem means. You usually have to read it more than once. So the poem that we're going to be taking a look at first is called A Bird Came Down the Walk, and it is by an American poet named Emily Dickinson, and it was written in the 1800s. So keep in mind that back in the 1800s, right, there was a lot of things that we have today that they did not have. Women's roles were different then. So when she wrote this poem, she may have had things in her mind or have had feelings that maybe today we really can't relate to, or things that maybe we might not think of because we're not living in the 1800s. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the poem, and we're going to sort of read it once, and then we're going to break it down and take a look at it a little bit closer, analyze it, okay? A bird came down the walk. A bird came down the walk. He did not know I saw. He bit an angle worm in halves and ate the fellow raw. And then he drank a dew from a convenient grass, and then hopped sideways to the wall to let a beetle pass. He glanced with rapid eyes that hurried all abroad. They looked like frightened beads, I thought. He stirred his velvet head. Like one in danger, cautious, I offered him a crumb, and he unrolled his feathers and rowed him softer home. Then oars divide the ocean, too silver for a seam, or butterflies off banks of moon leap splashless as they swim. So let's take a look at the poem, and we're not going to read it more than once, but we're going to sort of break it down and see if we can analyze it or take a closer look at it. So let's take a look at how many stanzas this poem has. Now remember when we talked about stanzas, we said that a stanza is a group of lines in a poem, sort of like a paragraph. So this poem has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 separate stanzas. So it's almost like having 5 separate paragraphs. What is the rhyme scheme? Remember we talked about rhyme scheme, how maybe there might be 2 lines that rhyme, and then we would label them with A's and B's. So if we look at the first stanza, a bird came down the walk. He did not know I saw. He bit an angleworm in halves and ate the fellow raw. So line 2, saw, and line 4, raw, rhyme. So the rhyme scheme for this stanza would be A, B, C, because this doesn't rhyme with walk or saw. So it would be A, B, C, B, because raw rhymes with saw from letter B. So it would be A, B, C, B would be the rhyme scheme there. Does this poem have a refrain? Is there any line that is repeated throughout the poem? Is there a line that we see more than once? And I would say the answer to that is no. There's not a line that is repeated throughout this poem. So there is no refrain. So let's take a look. It says 5 stanzas, rhyme scheme A, B, C, B, and no, this poem does not have a refrain. Now, we're going to look at each stanza a little bit closer, and we're going to come up with a little summary of each one. And this is where we're actually doing the analyzing, where we're actually looking at each stanza individually and saying, what is the poet trying to tell us here? So in the first stanza, right, the author of the poet or the speaker is observing a bird eat a worm. Okay, so this whole stanza can be sort of summarized by saying, well, the speaker is observing or watching a bird eat a worm. In the second stanza, the bird drinks water and hops sideways to let a beetle pass by. In the third stanza, the bird looks around quickly. He is scared. And this is sort of like we're taking each stanza and we're summarizing it. We're putting it into our own words or putting it into maybe simpler terms that we can understand a little bit better. In the fourth stanza, the author tries to give the bird a crumb to eat, but he flies away. And in the last stanza, describes the bird's movement as it flies. Okay, so we start out with the author just sort of coming across and seeing this bird eating a worm, right? And then sort of what the bird does. And then at the end of the poem, the bird is flying away, and the speaker or the author is sort of appreciating the beauty of the bird as it flies away. Now we're going to look at another poem, a very famous poem by one of my favorite poets, Robert Frost, who is an American poet. This poem was written in 1916, and it is called The Road Not Taken. So here is the poem, and I'm going to read it to you, and then we're going to sort of break it down by stanza and see if we can figure out what the poet is telling us. What is he saying? The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry that I could not travel both, and be one traveler, long I stood and looked down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So let's take a look at each stanza of this poem, and let's see if we can figure out what is Robert Frost telling us. What is this poem really about? As we look at a poem, sometimes it might appear to be about one thing on the outside or initially, and we might find out that it's actually about something else. So this poem appears to be about a road, right? A road in the woods. But let's find out if there's more to it than that. So let's take a look at the first stanza here, okay? 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry that I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. So what does that mean? What is Robert Frost telling us? The speaker, whoever that is walking in the woods and sees a fork in the road, right? A fork in the road is where the road kind of splits. You can go this way or you can go that way. The woods are yellow. He describes them as yellow, which means it's probably in the fall when the leaves turn. And the speaker wants to go down both roads, but he knows that it's impossible to do that. You can't go down both roads at once. So he has to choose one road. So he or she looks down one of the roads kind of as far as he can see. So he's kind of looking down that one road. Should I go that way? Right? Now in stanza 2, then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had worn them really about the same. Now, if you notice, there is rhyme scheme here as well. So we have fair, where, there. So A, that would be line A. Claim and same rhyme. So we have A, B, A, B would be our rhyme scheme. So what is Robert Frost telling us in this second stanza? So remember, he's looking down. He looks down the one road. He looks as far as he can see, but he knows he can't take both. So he actually chooses the other road. Okay, he kind of thinks, well, it looks just as good. It might even be better because it looks like it's grassy and not as many people have walked on it. But then as the speaker goes along, they realize that, it actually has been walked on. So they're probably about the same anyway. There was really no difference there. Maybe it looked that way from afar, but now that I've gotten here, I realize that they really weren't that much different. So in the third stanza, and both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. So he's thinking back, the speaker is thinking back that both roads were covered in leaves, which had not yet been walked on, right? When you kind of like crunch down the leaves and they kind of start to decay, they turn black. There's leaves on both paths. So he's kind of thinking, well, nobody's walked on this before, on the first one. And he thinks, you know what? I'll save that path, the other path, for another day. I'll come back and see what was down that other road since I didn't go down it. But then he sort of says the opposite. He says, yeah, but you know what? The way life goes, you might say I'm going to do this someday and you never do it. So he kind of is acknowledging or saying, I understand. I'm saying, yeah, I'm going to come back and do that someday, but I know that I probably won't, because in life, one decision leads to another. So in the road of life, right, if we're talking about the road of life, you might make a choice that leads to another choice and another choice and another choice. And you can never go back to that initial choice, right? You can never rewind, right, and travel back in time and change that choice that you made in the first place. And in the last stanza, I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So the speaker is imagining himself or herself in the future, kind of thinking back to this time when they chose a road in the woods. And they're looking back on their life thinking, I had a choice between two roads. There were two ways I could have gone, and I chose this one. And because I chose this one, that has led to certain, consequences and certain events in my life that were caused because I made that choice. Now, the speaker doesn't tell us if it was a good difference or a bad difference. And oftentimes people look at this poem and they think it means to do your own thing and to do the thing that less people are doing because it's better. But I don't really think he's telling us that. He's saying that he made a choice and that made the difference, but he doesn't tell us if it was a good difference or a bad difference. It just is sort of a message about life itself, that when you make a choice, other choices will come because of that. Things will happen, and you could never go back and change that choice. Once it's made, it's made. You can't travel back in time. So I think that Robert Frost is sort of writing this poem as a little bit of a life lesson here. In life, we come across roads diverging in the woods, so to speak, all the time, and we have to make a choice between one thing or another. And it might be a hard choice, and sometimes we might regret our choices. We might think we made the wrong choice, and sometimes we might be really happy and realize that we made a really good choice, and good things have happened because of it. So in conclusion, poetry is all about perspective, okay? And if you look at this picture, it's sort of one of those optical illusions where you look at it and you might see sort of a vase in the middle there, or like a candlestick holder, or you might see two faces on either side, right? Depending on how you look at it. And poetry is sort of like that. We can look at the same poem, two of us, and we can have totally different interpretations. We can have completely different impressions of the poem, and neither one is right or wrong. Beauty and art is in the eye of the beholder, and in this case, the poet and the reader. So the poet is, writing a poem, which is a piece of art, and as readers, it's up to us to sort of find the beauty in that poem. So I hope that this was helpful, and I hope that you enjoyed analyzing and taking a closer look at some poems. And I hope that when you're learning more about poetry in future grades, you kind of think back on this and remember our little introduction to analysis of poetry, interpretation of poetry. Okay, guys, thanks. Have a great day.